And that concludes the real history of slavery. Now on to climate change stuff. Another coffee, please.
Oh, not another coffee for Sam.
Hi there. I've just finished writing another script for a new animation series on the real history of slavery, inspired by Thomas Sowell. This animation is for a new education platform called True Arrow Academy of Critical Thinking, or TACT for short. TACT will be an educational resource platform that connects youth with academic heavyweights. Lessons will be written, run and influenced by an exceptional mix of high-profile smart people, including figures such as Thomas Sowell, Geoffrey Blaney, Stephen Hicks, Peter Ridd and many more. TACT's duty of care is to educate youth in order to uplift our society against those who are set on indoctrinating them against it, to help shape the education and minds of young people. Create an appetite for slow and steady, nationwide and international educational change, counteracting the regressive nature of modern subversive education. There's no beating around the bush here. Education has become indoctrination. Drag queen story times at local libraries push gender fluidity and seek to break down biological truths. Cancel culture eliminates classic texts and historical references no longer in vogue. History is rewritten and restricted to serve a populist agenda. Mental health is compromised with alarmist end-of-world propaganda. Students are mocked and abused for questioning popular opinions, and open debate, critical thinking and discussion are suppressed. While postmodern ideology chips away at objective truth, the space is filled with ideologies that erode the foundations of a productive education. TACT pushes back by providing non-politically correct, historically accurate, non-woke lessons aimed at developing critical thinkers, asserting the values of morals, ethics and truth, encouraging open discussion, critical thinking and debate, equipping youth to respond to modern political challenges, building a generation of informed individuals who seek to build upon the strong foundations of civilization. I'd like to show you the first TACT multifaceted critical thinking animation that introduces students to agenda-driven media, the rewriting of history and early insights into Australian history, titled, "How Can a Photograph Tell Three Different Stories?" Let's look at a photograph taken in 1901. What do you see? The caption reads, "An Aboriginal woman backs away from a white man holding a gun on Bentinck Island, Queensland in 1901. This photo, 118 years later, is published in 2019 in the Daily Inquirer in an article by journalist Charis Chang, titled "Crime! Aussie's History. Aboriginal Women Were Preyed On by Any and Every White Man." The article contains statements including, "Maybe it's not so easy to trust authorities that beat, killed and raped them. The shocking sexual violence that Aboriginal women suffered through. And Aboriginal women were preyed on by any and every white man whose whim it was to have a piece of black velvet wherever and whenever they pleased." Without prior knowledge, we would assume the white man in this photo has very sinister intentions. Ms. Chang credits this photograph to North of Capricorn, The Untold Story of Australia's North by Professor Henry Reynolds. Published in 2003, 16 years prior, a major work, densely illustrated and thoroughly researched. Here we find an uncropped version of this same photo showing another Aboriginal woman, also with her child, who looks to be smiling and laughing. The woman in Ms. Chang's version of the photo, we were told, was backing away in fear. Do you still think that is the case? The photo caption reads, "Aborigines, Bentinck Island, 1901. A unique photograph of what may well have been the moment of first contact. The women and children have retreated to the water's edge. The white man extends one hand in friendship but holds a rifle in the other, hidden behind his leg." Professor Reynolds definitively states that the women have retreated. The reader would likely assume in perceived fear from the white man. The reader would likely interpret that holding a rifle and keeping it hidden shows sinister intentions. Is he about to attack the women? Reynolds used this same photo in his book, Dispossession, published 14 years earlier in 1989. We now have another woman and her child, and now the complete photograph. But do we have the complete story? In dispossession, the caption reads, "There are very few photographs of the early contact with Aborigines. This one is therefore unusually interesting. Taken on Bentinck Island in 1901, it may represent a first meeting at close quarters of white and black. The European extends a hand of friendship but keeps his gun ready for instant use. The women have picked up their children and retreated to the edge of the water. The one closest to the white man looks terrified. The one on the left hides her face in her hands." Now what can the reader then assume? The reader understands there's a white man keeping his gun ready for instant use, and that the women are still fearful, having retreated. We also have one woman described as terrified. But why no mention of the smiling or laughing woman? How does Reynolds know that they have retreated to the water's edge? Is more research necessary? A keen researcher might endeavour to look for the camera roll. This series of photographs were taken in 1901 by an expedition to Bentinck Island led by Dr. Walter Roth, protector of Aborigines for North Queensland. In his company were native police, J.F. Bailey, director of the Botanic Gardens of Brisbane, and Charles Headley, a zoologist. Due to the Kayardild being known for their intertribal spearings, guns were carried for security reasons. Here we have some other photographs taken at the same time on Bentinck Island, as the photo used and cropped by Miss Chang and Professor Reynolds. Here we see two of Walter Roth's party on the edge of the reef. The Kayardild man holding up his hand on the right is Koltaringati Walter, as identified by his son. This photo shows Kayardild men on the edge of the reef. The central figure is Tarukingati Warangolta, as identified by his son. Here we see a Kayardild man holding a Chichilinganda, or a mariwu, a bifaced stone implement, in his hand. The Aboriginal women look to be voluntarily engaging with their visitors. One of Roth's party, holding his gun in clear view, appears to be playing with a woman's child. The white man in the original photograph is now smoking a cigarette, and all seem to be amicably getting along, including the Aboriginal men, who are surely the husbands of the women. The photos documented the first contact with the Kayardild due to the effects of a severe drought, intertribal fighting, disease, and malnutrition, the combination of which threatened to wipe out the population. By the 1940s, a majority of the Kayardild left their traditional home voluntarily. In 1948, an immense tidal wave forced the evacuation of the last of the Kayardild remaining on Bentinck Island to nearby Mornington Island, where they have remained ever since. So why, 118 years later, after the first contact, is there a journalist using a photo of this unique event to justify and help articulate her article? Aboriginal women were preyed on by any and every white man. Chang and Reynolds have cropped their photograph to convey a particular negative narrative about white men, establishing in the mind of the reader that perhaps all encounters were aggressive and motivated by sinister intentions. This is an example of misusing a photo to rewrite history, but by applying critical thinking and some dedicated research. A different story of the 2019 photo has emerged, in this case, a positive one. Thanks for watching. Now only a few hundred more animations to script, storyboard and animate. Before I go on about how great this platform is going to be and why you would want to support it, let me introduce myself. My name is Sam McClelland and I'm the founder of TACT. As a school teacher in Australia, I witnessed the influence of the postmodern agenda firsthand. While my attempt to challenge the status quo was not tolerated, think Lindsay Shepherd style, I never lost my passion for developing informed youth who questioned the insidious ideologies surrounding them. After resigning from my teaching position, I then created True Arrow events and brought Jordan Peterson to Australia for his inaugural tour. I then toured two other great minds before Australian governments shut the borders in 2020. On multiple occasions through True Arrow events, I've dominated the news cycle behind the scenes for up to 6 weeks at a time. In 2020, I began covering the consequences of government overreach, became a published opinion writer and a documentary maker, also making another documentary now, and my short films on liberty and government overreach have accumulated several million views. In early 2021, I started working on TACT. Indoctrinating youth with the perils of man-made climate change is perhaps one of the biggest agendas of modern education. So we need a platform that brings together the views of intellectual heavyweights pushing against the grain. Here is a quick highlights version of a film lesson, Climate Change and Critical Thinking, with Dr. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace.
Hi. Good morning, everyone.
What was the biggest motive towards starting Greenpeace?
It was a very dangerous time in the world.
What did you do in Greenpeace?
And then we went on to protest against the French atmospheric nuclear testing at Mururoa Atoll.
Why did you leave Greenpeace?
By the time I left, we were making over $100 million a year from people giving us money so we would continue. But what that does is it makes fundraising more important. And before you know it, they started adopting positions on environmental issues that were not science-based any longer. Greenpeace and much of the rest of the environmental movement were portraying humans as the enemies of the earth. So I had to leave because that's the way it was going. And in a way, it's turned into a racket peddling junk science, as I put it succinctly today. And critical thinking is a discussion of how we think. In the first paragraph of any article, we should never trust the words may, might, or could, as in climate change may be causing the death of the coral reefs. Whenever you see the word may introducing a story, remember to think to yourself, may or may not, might or might not, could or could not.
If carbon dioxide isn't bad, then is there actually anything that's making the climate rise?
The climate is always changing. One of the great ironies about the climate is getting too warm narrative is that we're actually in one of the coldest periods in the last 500 million years right now. This is the Pleistocene Ice Age. And CO2 is lower now during this last major glaciation event and coming into the pre-industrial era, lower than it ever has been in the history of the Earth. CO2 was getting so low during the last major glaciation that it came close to where plants die for lack of it. All they talk about is that CO2 is going to make the world too hot for life in 10, 20, 30 years. This is not true. It is a scare story. And if you talk to people who are in the climate catastrophe, a climate alarmism, climate emergency category, they don't care about anything that happened before 1850. Because the things that happened before 1850 completely blow their hypothesis out of the water.
So schools keep telling us about the greenhouse effect and how CO2 is killing everything. Why?
We have no actual evidence that CO2 has caused this increase in temperature of 1 degree since 1850, because it was already warming at that same rate for 150 years prior to our putting any additional CO2 into the atmosphere. Nearly all the scare stories today are based on things that are either invisible or so remote that the average person cannot check it for themselves, cannot observe it for themselves. You see, the very basis of science, the beginning of science is observation. Religion's different. In religion, we're asked to believe in something we've never seen. But in science, we're required to see something before we can believe in it.
If CO2 isn't bad, then why is the Great Barrier Reef still dying?
Yes, well, it's not. You are being lied to by people who are trying to get huge government grants. And that is why Dr. Peter Ridd, a 30-year career professor at James Cook University in Queensland, he was fired for disagreeing with the other professors about the health of the coral reef. As a professor, you're supposed to have academic freedom and be allowed to speak your mind, whether other people agree with you or not. That's the whole idea of the university, is a bastion where people can be free to speak their mind.
I didn't expect to be so interested in what Patrick had to say, and I found myself reconsidering and questioning what I'd been taught beforehand at school.
I thought it was very interesting, and it had a lot of new things to me because, like, in my school, there's sometimes whole hours that we spend in a day talking about climate change, and just learning that it isn't actually what I know it or knew it was is kind of surprising.
I thought it was really great. Patrick Moore was fantastic with the kids. He got them to open up. They were clearly interested in what he had to say, and they were really surprised, and you could see that by the end of it they were starting to reassess the things that they had been told at school, assumptions that they had. And I just think that's really healthy, and I think this is a much needed gap in the curriculum.
That was the first filmed lesson. Now we need to make a few hundred more video segments. Once the website is ready, animated and film lessons will be uploaded as they are produced. Dear Peter Reed, would you like to write a script for an animation and also conduct a filmed lesson about how the Great Barrier Reef is not dying due to climate change? Oh, he's replied, yes, I'd be very happy to contribute. Filmed lessons are then segmented into several short videos for the website. TACT will initially be suitable for learners from the age of 12 all the way up to our treasured senior citizens, and later for younger learners. While of high value to youth, the resources will also be appreciated by homeschool teachers, brave teachers and principals, and school boards of mainstream and private schools, independent schools and classical liberal schools, parents, grandparents and guardians who need to defragment the day's indoctrination cast upon the younger ones in a mainstream government or private school. The platform will also include lesson plans and extended videos for longer form classroom lessons. Each lesson has the potential to be a turning point in a young learner's understanding on a range of various important topics. TACT will initially focus on a range of topics, including Australian history, uncommon knowledge, ancient and modern. From the ancient Great Rising of the Seas to the lost Pygmy tribes to the massacre of Irish rebels wanting to return to their homeland. The journey of liberty and freedoms, a relatively new concept in history's terms. What are freedoms? Where did they come from, and do we still value them? And the isms, communism, socialism, postmodernism, wokeism. An example of a lesson series includes the 4 stages of communist subversion, inspired by Yuri Bezmenov. Climate realism. The world isn't ending due to climate change. The world has been ending as far back as any records kept by previous civilizations. The most recent saga of man-made climate change is no different. Learners, via the science, will come to understand the hidden agendas pushing the religion of climate change. History removed, bringing back what has been suppressed from the world's history books. For example, once a student understands the real history of slavery, the modern ideological teaching of slavery becomes understood as a sinister agenda, and the narrative begins to fall apart. Life lessons, stories of us. A teacher of renown will share their life lessons to instill strategies, values, and the moral fibre to combat hurdles that youth will face throughout life, and standalone local issues. These lessons will focus on the positive narratives about Australia and help build community. It is TACT's goal that every Australian child and adult sees at least one TACT lesson, and it is our duty of care to protect youth from the sinister agendas of adults. This is where you come in. Supporters will be the lifeblood of TACT to ensure a leading education platform for youth and education networks. Your donation will immediately support TACT's mission, research and content to improve education by affirming the presence of a measured and considered platform in the education debate. Thank you. After reviewing the boards of different funding platforms, I've decided to go with Give, Send, Go. Not only because there isn't any third wave feminists on the board writing about how terrible the patriarchy is, but also because all of the funds go towards building the project. On Give, Send, Go, you can choose to become a monthly supporter or a one-off supporter. And with ongoing support, these will also be uploaded on social media platforms to watch for free. So let's build this platform together on Give, Send, Go. Search for givesendgo.com/TACT. That's TAACT. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, another coffee coming up, Sam.
Oh, Sam, he's awesome.
Oh, he's working on a great project.